Welcome to The Laws of Style, featuring conversations on creativity, fashion, and the law from the leading edge of our economy and culture. Hosted by noted fashion lawyer Douglas Hand.
For this episode, I'm joined by Chinese-American women's wear designer Peter Som. What advice would you give to a designer coming out of school that didn't have that business skill set?
Know what you're good at and know what you need to get somebody else to do. Designing is a very small piece of the pie.
In your mind, what is the difference between fashion and style?
Fashion provides a dream. Again, at the end of the day, it is how do you communicate your authentic brand message in the best way possible.
Hello and welcome to the podcast, The Laws of Style, downloading to you from the offices of the law firm HBA, high above Bryant Park in the Fashion District of New York City. I'm your host, Douglas Hand, fashion lawyer, fashion law professor, and self-styled, well-dressed man. For this episode, I'm joined by Chinese-American women's wear designer Peter Som. Peter, thank you for coming in this morning.
Hey, Doug, how are you?
Good. Well, so let's get right into it, Peter. You've worked at some major houses over your career, interning at Michael Kors and Calvin Klein while in grad school at Parsons, then working full-time at Bill Blass and Tommy Hilfiger. So going back to your school days and those internships specifically, did the internship experience at those two brands enhance your experience, and what can you say about that as juxtaposed by what you learned in the classroom?
I think internships are a crucial part of the educational experience. What you learn in a classroom is one thing, but what you learn on the job, witnessing, even if you're just sorting buttons or, hanging samples, you're seeing a whole machine go. And at that point, Michael was a smaller business, not the multi-million or billion-dollar business it is today.
And he was there
He
working
was there.
with you.
There was probably 12 people in the office. He answered the phone. I answered the phone. The design team was like 5 people. So that was a great experience. And then Calvin at that point was, a larger company. And so it was a great way to see kind of how two different companies worked. And for me, those were so important on every level to really experience that. And not only that, you're at backstage at fashion shows with top models. That's so cool.
At a very young age, right?
Yep.
How old were you at that time?
I had gone to Connecticut College first, and then I went to Parsons. So at that point, I was 25 or so, maybe.
Okay.
So
The salad days, I guess.
yes.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about the state of design education here in the U.S. Are schools like Parsons, FIT, RISD, are they getting it right? I mean, are designers graduating with all that they need as a toolkit, or are there gaps in what they're learning?
I think what I've seen from having done guest critic stints at Parsons, at SCAD, which is Savannah College of Art and Design, and seeing what the students are doing at other design schools. Now I think they're up to speed. I think it definitely took a while to break the traditional curriculum of, the standard way of working. But the industry, obviously, as we've all seen, has had a huge sea change over the last 10 years. And now finally, I think what we're seeing is design schools embracing this, really letting their kids shine in terms of multidisciplinary, cross-cultural influences and techniques and technology, and I think you're seeing it. And I think the kids coming out have it's not just one way of succeeding now. And I think you see that in the industry itself. There's not one path to success. There's many different now.
How about the business elements of starting one's own brand? And that's obviously not the path for every graduate. Many go into big houses and, stay there for decades before launching their own brand. Some designers stay at a big house for their entire careers. But given the proliferation of emerging U.S. brands, Do you feel that the entrepreneurship, the business elements are taught in those design schools, or at least mentioned enough so that young designers, once they hit the ground, have a sense of what they should be hiring to fill in terms of gaps of knowledge?
I think more now than ever, the business side is being made super critical in terms of the curriculum. I think it's interesting. So many of the companies that have been started in the last 5 to 8 years are started not by fashion designers, but by VC people, private equity people, tech people. So
who often have that background, an MBA in their pocket, or
and then they're hiring the design talent to fill in where the product is needed. Obviously, I mean, for me as a product person, product is king, but the piece of the pie of marketing and technology are huge.
Yeah. Well, so upon graduation from Parsons, you began working for Bill Blass, and I know that was a close relationship. Describe for us this remarkable creator and his influence on you in your design process.
Well, yeah, working for Mr. Blass was an honor and an amazing experience, because I think at that point there were only a few houses that operated in this sort of semi-couture kind of way. Oscar de la Renta, Carolina Herrera, and Mr. Blass, and it was old school. You got in at 9, you left at 5. It was an amazing experience just to witness, the workrooms, the craft of making beautiful clothes. And just seeing how the whole operation functioned. I was sort of like a super wide-eyed kid, really. I mean, one of my main jobs was making sure the archive was kind of kept in check. So for me, just to disappear in that massive sort of locked-off room and look at all these pieces from even his previous Maurice Rentner days and everything was a dream come true for a kid.
Where was the physical plant? Was it here in the Garment District, or?
The 550 7th Avenue, and there was another outpost just down the street. So he had two kind of places, but the mothership was 550, which again, a legendary 7th Avenue building.
And so, given this is the laws of style, I'm curious as to how Mr. Blass dressed and presented himself in the office.
He wore a suit and tie every day. I'm sure it was bespoke. I'm sure it was custom. One of my favorite images of him is he would get his hair cut in his legendary office. So he'd be sitting in a chair. The barber would come. He'd have his, the big thing they put on to,
smock.
And he'd be chatting away, sometimes smoking. And the guy would be cutting his hair in the middle of this sort of beautiful office.
Yeah, that's very decadent.
He was a dapper guy.
Old school.
Yes.
And it's perhaps a little known fact that Mr. Blass was the first designer in the U.S. who actually named his brand after himself, created an eponymous brand. This is now, of course, quite common. You yourself have an eponymous brand, Peter Salm. But how do you think this impacted his legacy? And I guess embedded in that question is the question, how do you feel about the brand today?
Well, I think it speaks to a larger question in terms of a brand that is named after a person. How does that live on? In the U.S. market, like which brands have sort of lived and succeeded past their predecessor? And it's been touch and go. I mean, I think you look at in Europe, there's this huge tradition, Christian Dior. I mean, the names are endless. So it's interesting, like what is going on in sort of the American arena of a brand sort of living past its predecessor's death. I think Mr. Blass, was very smart in how he built his business. He was one of the first ones to have a full licensing world that, again, was very high-low. And this was also in a day where it was very difficult to do that. In today's market, designers are able to sort of bounce back and forth between what traditional sort of price points are, and those barriers are pretty much gone in a lot of ways. But back then, if you look at Halston when he did the J.C. Penney, he was drafted by, I think it was Bergdorf's maybe. So I think Mr. Blass was very smart in being able to sort of balance that.
Yeah. So, yeah, you mentioned Halston, which I think is a great example of a storied American brand, which ultimately couldn't live past its eponymous designer, and has candidly struggled to find its appropriate place with consumers. Um, the big powerhouse brands from the 80s and 90s, I'm thinking Donna Karan, I'm thinking Calvin Klein, I'm thinking even Michael Kors. Is that their fate once those individuals truly depart from their brands? I mean, obviously Donna is completely disassociated from her brand now, and perhaps, to embellish the question, how do the European houses, or how have they in your mind, the Gucci's, the Dior's, the Fendi's, those are brands that are family names, but have lived beyond the life of the first designer. How have we gotten it wrong as American designers to be able to maintain and establish that legacy?
Well, I think the one thing we have to remember is these European brands started in the 20s, the 10s. They started really their history is much longer. So what we have to remember is a lot of these European brands, most of them were started in the first half of the 20th century, even the 1920s, the 1910s. So the European sort of houses have a long-standing tradition. They've had a lot longer to sort of build up their DNA and their sort of their market share. So the
legacy,
their legacy,
women
exactly.
and men to a degree, but women who their grandmothers wore that house, and
Yeah.
there's more of a history there. Okay, that's
Yeah, and so I think when you look at what I consider the pantheon of great American designers, it's Donna, Calvin, Ralph, Michael. I mean, these guys have started much later, so it's yet to see. Really, I think that's sort of the question mark. I think for the European brands, the way their fashion system was for many decades was the same, business as usual. You do a collection, the customer, the store comes and buys it. This is how it went. Now we're in a phase where all companies are having to pivot and to really react quickly as possible to massive changes in the market. And I think, the American, uh, these sort of American stalwarts are having to do that as well. So I think it's sort of a time we'll see kind of thing.
yeah.
But I can't imagine a Ralph Lauren going anywhere after he passes. I mean, I think that's one brand that has created a world, a community, a DNA that is so ingrained into the culture. It's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, and yet that amazingly active man is still at the helm of his brand. And so absolutely time will tell. I've always wondered if part of it is as simple as many of the European houses simply go by the last name as opposed to a first and last name. All of those
Yeah.
examples, Donna Karan, Tommy Hilfiger, Michael Kors, it's both names.
It is. Yeah, I think, I mean, it's going to be about what the product is, how they evolve. All these companies evolve, how they reflect the times. It is that balancing. How do you reflect the times to stay current, but how do you maintain your DNA and your core heritage? How do you blend those? And I think that's always, as somebody who's consulted with a lot of companies, that's always a fascinating and really interesting and exciting proposition.
So, Peter Salm, and I'm not addressing you, I am introducing the company and your eponymous brand. Do you think that the fact that you worked for four eponymous brands informed your decision to name your company after yourself?
I think, well, it's funny. I wanted to be a fashion designer ever since I was in fifth grade. So I was a little kid drawing. So for me, there was never a question. It was always a clear, straight line toward Peter Som, the brand. Um, and so that's really how it came about. I think when I started, there were probably that was almost a given to name your brand your name. I think now you see lots of brands like a Rag and Bone or other names that are not the founders' names. And I think there are advantages and disadvantages to both.
What are some of the disadvantages that you've encountered over the course of your company's history?
Well, I think just referring to our sort of talk about you know houses and their names living on after their founder. Um, will the again a company that is tied so wholly to a person's name and who they are, it's a bigger leap to get to sort of the next chapter of that company's life without that person, because again, it's the name of the person. um, I mourn sort of a Jeffrey Bean, like, oh my gosh, this amazing talent who is now, it's shirts and ties, and that's what it is. But it's not sort of the artistry it was.
Hmm.
Um, but a Theory or a Rag and Bone, or I mean, there's plenty of other names. Uh, they may have a better sort of chance in terms of a longevity because the brand name is the DNA, not the person.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and from the investment perspective and the legal perspective, legal advisors who have clients who are on the investing side are often in a challenging position to try to convince their clients, the investors, that it is a riskless proposition investing in an eponymous brand because there is so much risk that is wrapped up in the individual.
Yeah.
I mean, I will cite John Galliano, perhaps, as a good example of someone still living, but whose name has been tarnished by the incident in Paris and perhaps one would say his personality. But how does one diligence that
Yeah.
to be able to determine that you're dealing with someone like a Peter Som who is professional and who will do what he says, and that you've got both a great designer but a great spokesperson for the brand versus someone who is more risky. And you ask that question at one point in the individual's life. I mean, obviously people change, and you yourself will get to a point at a later stage of your life where things may be more or less important for you, and that may inform your design and your view of brand. So I do think this isn't a question as much as a statement from the not so cheap seats of the investing public. It's fraught with more challenges when you're investing in a brand like that as opposed to a Theory or a Rag and Bone or a Warby Parker, which is a completely manufactured name.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think the value proposition on a person's name and the legs that it may have to get you where you want to go are really based on that person. You do see a lot of brands now that, like Perry Ellis, where it's become something completely different. And or you see a Kate Spade, which is now doing really well. With unfortunately the sad sort of,
may she rest in peace, absolutely
horrible sort of sad passing of the founder. But now that brand is doing well. So it's really, I think, about brand management and there's really a team of people. It has to be that magic mix of people at the helm of whatever company it is to be able to take that company and transition it into the next phase of its life. It is about leadership.
Mm-hmm.
It comes back to the people.
Yeah,
power to the people.
Well, on that point, having helmed your brand for a number of years now, what advice would you give to a designer coming out of school that didn't have that business skill set? And how important is leadership on the business side? And maybe some of the positions that are important to fill so that a designer can design and focus on brand and create story and do the thing that he or she is best at.
Yeah, I think the first thing to understand is, know what you're good at and know what you need to get somebody else to do. It's really acknowledging that, like, okay, I'm good at design, I'm good at product, I'm good at, storytelling. All the other parts are is that, and that's a big part. The other part is vital. Otherwise, it's a really expensive hobby.
Yeah.
I've often said that designing is a very small piece of the pie. It's a wonderful piece of pie, and then that's the piece of the pie that's the whole reason why like one gets into this business as a designer is that piece of the pie. But there's a huge machine that is the rest of the pie that has to happen for your piece of the pie to be able to get out there and to be seen and to be worn and to be, you know, viewed by the public. So leadership is at all levels is crucial, from the design side, from the business side, the marketing side, production, that supply chain part. There are crucial pieces of the puzzle that have to all work in harmony, and a lot of times it doesn't, but a lot of times it does.
And is it difficult to find skilled people in managerial roles who understand the fashion industry? I mean, this is maybe, we started with education, and now I'm almost flipping to, the education of young executives who come out of MBA programs, very few of which, I mean, NYU is one example of an MBA that is focused on the fashion industry. But is there a bit of a dearth of talent that has that kind of a background to understand supply chain and marketing and brand from an executive perspective?
I think, finding somebody that has the entire package and can work with a creative person is really sort of the key to unlocking the puzzle. I think working with creative people is a different nuance. It really is. I mean, we can be moody, we can be introspective, we can be in our heads. It is a different kind of thing, and you have to be able to manage that, and you have to be able to manage, again, like all these other pieces. So I think to find somebody that can sort of balance all these, it's a juggling act, really.
Yeah.
And I think there's been an increase, obviously, in sort of the interest in fashion over the last 10, 15 years. Project Runway, all these other, social media, everyone is seeing fashion. It's something that is, again, personal to everybody. Everybody wears clothes. And that's how you express yourself personally. So everyone has a personal sort of affinity with clothing and how you would dress. So, but that doesn't always make you a good fashion executive. There's not always a direct translation there either.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective as a legal practitioner, I very much take to heart your comments on working with creative people. I mean, we look for associates and other lawyers to hire laterally who do have that gene of being able to not only explain to a creative person difficult concepts, legal concepts, but also pull from them what they want. I mean, a lawyer as a service provider is really only as good. We're just an instrument to do the will of the client. And if you don't know what the client's will ultimately is, you may be doing a great job that's not the right job.
Yeah.
But back to the importance of apparel and how it applies to everyone, and switching gears a little bit. In your mind, what is the difference between fashion and style?
Well, I think that's an interesting question because, they say, and this is, I don't know if it's an old adage or whatnot, but they say fashion you can buy, style you're born with it. And I think that still holds true. I think, somebody can wear a white t-shirt in a certain way, and it's a t-shirt from J. Crew or The Gap, and it looks like just a t-shirt. Somebody else can wear a t-shirt and know how to roll the sleeve slightly and tuck the shirt in slightly in a certain way. Style is, I guess you can say, really an attitude and how you carry yourself. You could be wearing a $2 pair of shoes, and you could still have a certain elegance or air about you. And I think that comes from self-confidence in knowing who you are, and the ability to express yourself, the ability to sort of dress for whatever occasion comes about. Fashion, for me, is is clothing. It is clothing that does, again, that begs to another question: what is clothing versus fashion? Fashion provides a dream. Fashion is aspiration. It's beauty. It's clothing is really one of the three fundamental needs. Food, clothing, shelter. But where food can just be McDonald's, or it can be organic, local, beautiful heirloom tomatoes. Same with clothing. It's the same thing. It can be just your basic whatever, or it can be the most beautiful haute couture.
Mm-hmm. Well, so on to your personal style and on to our 4W questions, which is a feature of every podcast, largely for the benefit of our listeners who aren't tuning in and watching us on YouTube. But the what, who, when, and why of how you came in dressed today. What, Peter? What are you wearing? Just in terms of products, not who, not the brands.
I wear a lot of black T-shirts or navy T-shirts, and a lot of. Well, I'm actually wearing black pants as well.
Yeah, you're doing navy and black, which is visually a subtle transition.
Yeah, I do love navy and black together. I do usually wear a white sneaker that gives me a little exclamation point, I guess.
And indeed you are wearing white sneakers.
Yep. I do wear khaki too in the summer. It's funny, every summer I tell my friends, okay, this summer I'm only wearing black, navy, khaki, white, and stripes. And they're like, okay, so that's like every other summer. And I'm like, yes, you're right. I tend to dress in a uniform, and I think, a lot of my fashion folk, we spend so many hours looking at prints and patterns and imagining people wearing, colors and everything that, again, it's just like, I just want to wear something simple and clean, and I can just, do what I got to do.
I think one of your former colleagues, Michael Bastian, we were chatting about menswear in the summer, and what he said to me, which has always stuck with me, was navy and white, always right.
True. Yeah. Very, very true.
Okay, so who, of the brands, you've got, light T-shirt, short sleeve T-shirt, light pants, you've got your sneakers. What are the brands represented here?
These are Acne I wear a lot of Acne T-shirts. I think I like a sort of slightly heavier cotton. These pants, believe it or not, are Uniqlo. As far as the high and low, Uniqlo is one of my go-tos.
The T-shirt, did the T-shirt retail for more than the pants?
Probably, yes, okay. Yes. So you always in your head do the cost per wear kind of like a thing, and you're like, okay, I'm going to wear these T-shirts like until they're threadbare, and then they'll probably turn into sleeping T-shirts. The pants are the Thomas Meyer and Uniqlo collaboration.
Okay.
So yeah, I tend to stick with sort of a lot of the same brands. If it's on the higher end, Margiela, Acne, some Officine General.
And Peter, the watch, the glasses, the shoes, and the bag, because we're fashion is more than just apparel, right? It's accessories.
The only accessory I wear is this Rolex. Was my dad's from the early 60s. And like I don't have a piercing or a tattoo or nothing. I'm like a newborn baby, but I do wear this Rolex. The sneakers are Stan Smiths. Again, cheap and cheerful and a bit ubiquitous, but I have to say they are practical. I like the ones
with the navy blue, not the green.
I do the navy blue, and then this bag. It's funny. It's a nylon Prada top handle with a shoulder strap, because I do appreciate a hands-free moment with the shoulder strap. But I had been looking for just a bag that I could throw under an airplane seat or in the overhead compartment. And it wasn't too precious, wasn't too structured, and this kind of fit the bill. So it's I've kind of gone full circle back to like 20 years ago when I was buying all that Prada nylon stuff.
Right. And the glasses?
The glasses are by a Japanese brand, True Vintage. Oh my God, what are they by? They're a Japanese brand. I'm actually True Vintage. I totally forget who they're by.
This is a common problem actually with branding eyewear. I mean, we work with a lot of eyewear, both manufacturers and folks who wind
Yeah.
up in licenses with them. There's very little real estate to actually provide the branding on. So
There is. The logo's on there, but it's a cool Japanese brand, which I'm gonna not even
we'll
try to
put that
like.
in the lead
Yeah,
in. We'll
exactly.
put that in the Twitter or Instagram feed. Okay. Well, the next question is when, and by that question I mean seasonally. Um, any of these products of any particular season that you're aware of? Because I think my anecdotal evidence is going to show, at least with many of the men that I have on the Laws of Style podcast, that they have no idea what season what they're wearing is from.
Yeah. I think that reflects, kind of how we dress, in general, even how we design. You design pretty much the same all year round, and then you maybe throw in a few heavy sweaters and a few coats, but that's pretty much it. I mean, I know the pants are a spring summer because they're kind of a lighter cotton. These t-shirts, they run it all the time.
Right.
So it's
Basics.
yeah, I can just go in and
And
buy.
by season, I certainly mean, you're clearly spring, summer. This is all light, but I mean 2018, 2019,
Oh God, yeah.
2015,
The only reason I know these pants is because that collaboration just happened. But these t-shirts, yeah, it could be any time at any. I can walk into any acne store in the world at any point, and they'll have this t-shirt.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a weird comfort.
And then, of course, the why question. So why this particular ensemble, as uniform as it is, and we've known each other many years. You often look like this, but for today, any particular why to put this on?
Well, we're here in New York City. It is tropical and humid and kind of gross out. And
Yeah.
I was really dressing for practicality and running around and being in the office and whatnot. So practicality does inform a lot of my sartorial decisions.
Well, so in the book, The Laws of Style, I elucidate a bunch of guidelines for men to dress in a manner that is capable and elegant. Because at least for me as a legal practitioner, that's the way I think of my law practice. That's the way I want to be perceived. Given your role as a designer, and in particular a designer of women's wear, how do you want to be perceived through how you dress? And so what do you think your sartorial choices say about that?
I think as a designer, technically all bets are off. You can wear whatever you want to wear because you're the quote unquote creative. I usually stay to the same color palette, so which is darker. I think it sort of conveys kind of a little bit of an authority and sort of like, okay, this person's creative. I do appreciate sort of basic building blocks of a wardrobe. T-shirts that are a little bit nicer, like this Acne one, or really clean, beautiful pants. I do think an unconstructed blazer is actually really important. In my field, you don't have to wear like a tailored sort of jacket and pant necessarily at any point. Maybe a tuxedo, when you're going to a black tie event.
Right.
But for me, I have a whole slew of sort of unconstructed blazers, whether they're engineered garments or Acne, that I can just throw on over this and just change the shoes to like a brogue and kind of be like
dressed up.
Yeah, I feel a little sassy and snappy.
Well, and I think that's a great lesson for many men, that there are deconstructed suits out there, unlined suits that are extremely comfortable, but still read suit, read, if not highly tailored, still tailored. And you can throw a knit tie under that with a dress shirt, and you can look very work appropriate if you worked in an office as a lawyer or banker or other. As a women's wear designer, how do you think these questions of personal presentation, particularly for someone in the workplace, in a say white collar workplace, are different for women?
I think the women in the working place, there's a bit more of a minefield in terms of presenting oneself because the choices are much more vast. Men, you if you're in a corporate environment, you put in a suit, you put in a tie, don't think about it. You can own 3 suits and just rotate them. I mean,
right.
And so yeah, the question is, for women, dressing appropriately and, making sure that you feel great. And I think that's my job as a designer, is to make sure you can put something on, zip it up, and you don't have to think about it for the rest of the day. And I think that is that balance between practicality and sort of and design, making sure you can meld all these things together.
Do you design for a particular woman in mind as you are going through that process of creation? Is there a woman or a subset of women that you are thinking about?
I think about a lot of the women in my life, friends, family members who are professional, they have families that are busy, they want to look great, they like fashion, they're not obsessed with it, but they want to look great. And I think for me, the important part is to understand what they want. And again, as a man, I will never understand truly what it is to wear women's clothing. So I rely on these women to tell me, like, does this dress, will my bra strap show? Can I
Mhm.
get it on without somebody else? Is the length right when I sit down? I mean, these are things that I need all my women around me to
Yeah.
help me,
Well,
because
who are some of your muses?
I mean, I think there's so many women in my life that are sort of just vital. My friend Christine Kim, she's a curator at LACMA. We've known each other since college. You know, she has two beautiful kids. She lives in LA. Rupal Patel, who
Hmm.
I've known since the day one of my line, who's now at Saks, and she's been able to balance work and life and the demanding schedule. And I think for me, I've always said there's nothing more sexy than a woman who hasn't looked like she's tried too hard. And I think that I'm maybe borrowing that from Mr. Blass. He probably said that
Right.
because he was the king of sort of the evening skirt and the cardigan, and the sweater. So for me, I always want to make sure that a woman looks effortless, that she, it's more that somebody will notice her when she walks in the room, not what she's wearing. And I think that to me is that nuance.
Yeah. The statement is understatement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And back to your expression or distinction of fashion and style, I mean, you definitely mentioned confidence. And when you can put something on and not think about it again, you're kind of inherently confident, right? You're confident in that choice of garment. You know you look good, and then you can exude confidence, which of course makes you look even better. So yeah,
That's
it's
totally
a
it.
great cycle of design. So I'm curious. So I'm a SoCal guy, born in LA. You're a NoCal guy
Mm-hmm.
from San Francisco Bay Area. Is there anything about San Francisco that creeps into your design? Is there a San Francisco aesthetic? Is that a thing?
It's a thing. I think that there's a Northern California laid back kind of ease, which that's a little bit crunchy. I grew up in the Bay Area in the '70s, so there is some crunchiness and some bohemian kind of feelings happening. So I think that's maybe where the effortlessness comes in, and that ease and that sort of sense of the colors and the textures and the proportions that I always love. I mean, every time I go back to see my family in San Francisco, I'm amazed at the beauty. I mean, you're in Pacific Heights and you go down
Mm,
that hill and you see the entire Bay Area,
yeah.
and whether it's foggy or there's a sunset and there's 50 sailboats in this bay, it's always like, wow, this is real. It's not a movie set.
Yeah. Yeah. Traditionally, we've spoken about menswear and women's wear, and traditionally there's been a very clear dichotomy between those two. Um, I am now seeing a real trend towards unisex offerings and gender fluid design. Um, they incorporate elements of both menswear and women's wear. Uh, is this the future? Does this resonate with you, and do you think it has legs, or is it just a trend?
I think fashion is a reflection of society, right? So you're seeing an increased visibility and acceptance, which is an amazing thing, of trans people, of people that don't identify with traditional, sex and non-binary kind of identification. So you're seeing this melding of kind of traditional gender roles in society, and the visibility is greater and greater. And I think that that reflects in fashion. You see companies like the Salting, where
Hmm.
they're doing unisex sort of linen like shirt slash tunics. I know another company where they're doing these big caftans that are, you know, um, sort of for men or for women or for anybody. Um, so I think you're going to see more and more. I think it'll be interesting. Again, it's sort of like we shall see how it kind of plays out and how far it can go, and it becomes really more about the product itself, uh, and the storytelling around it slash marketing, and how do you create a community. And I think, I mean, that speaks to the bigger question in terms of companies now. It's about companies now that are resonating are creating communities. So I think that's, you see that a lot in these uh, gender neutral brands starting. They are creating community because they're really at the forefront of this movement.
Yeah. Well, and interestingly, we have seen more and more successful direct to consumer propositions. Um, and to a degree, this is this is a branch from that tree. Insofar as I think traditionally in a wholesale model, you'd have real problems trying to sell a unisex line because who would you call the
And
the
yeah,
women's buyer, the men's buyer? Where would they put it?
you don't fit in a traditional box. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. But on that point, and speaking to your observation that many of the new brands are actually started by Wharton MBAs and Harvard MBAs with,
Stanford, yeah, everything.
with
Yeah.
tech backgrounds. The costs actually to start a brand, if it's a direct to consumer brand, have arguably never been higher because what one needs to do is vertically integrate as much as possible, and that requires a very expensive built out e-com platform. Um, in the past, if one was reliant on wholesale accounts, you could simply design, you could wait for the orders to come in, you could hopefully through factoring or other financial bridging pay for the orders, ship
Hmm.
them to the wholesale accounts, and wait for the money to then come back in and
Yeah.
bite your nails while you were doing that. But ultimately, you didn't need to come up with so much seed capital. Um, does that resonate with you as look at your brand and where it is now and where you want to take it?
I think the sort of new direct to consumer model is kind of what's happening. And it's interesting because you are, again, the company is allowed to communicate directly with the consumer at every level, marketing level, social media, PR level, and at the product level. And again, so you really can immediately see who's buying what, where they're buying. You really have sort of direct access to analytics and kind of the information that in the past we would have to beg our stores for selling reports. But these were sort of very high level, not very granular selling reports where you just kind of understood your sell through. With direct to consumer, you can track your sales to the region, to the zip code. You can really understand where the customer is resonating, is the customer is seeing your product, and that where your product is resonating. And then, if you want to back into brick and mortar, you have informed decisions about where
Right.
your key markets are because you've already seen sort of the wide sweep of your consumer.
Which is interestingly why many of those brands have done that, and
Yeah.
Warby Parker stores are popping up,
Yeah.
and you saw the proliferation of bonobo stores or showrooms,
Yeah.
so to
I
speak.
mean, I think that speaks to the importance of brick and mortar. I mean, I think, 5 years ago, everyone poo-pooed brick and mortar is just going to die. And I think what it is just changing. And again, we speak to, the importance of experience, of building community. Clothes are physical things that people want to touch and feel. But it's not, they want to understand more about the brand and what it's about, and if they feel like they can identify with that brand. How do you do that? Instagram can only do so much. So that's why I think all these brands are really backing into brick and mortar, because at the end of the day, people do want to sort of experience the clothes. And you experience clothes in 360, whether it's around your body or in the space that surrounds you.
And speaking to additional costs, as soon as you have customer acquisition and you're taking customer data, you're in a highly regulated world of consumer protection. As soon as you're in brick and mortar, you're in a lease and dealing with landlords, and so your legal fees are undoubtedly high from an early stage. This all speaks to those companies being fairly immediately well funded by the venture capital community, which is not a traditional model for designers to start brands. Do you think that will harm, potentially the next great crop of designers, be they American or European or Asian, anywhere?
Hmm.
That the model is now, to a degree, driven more by the money
By,
side,
by
more by
and
the tech
data,
side
yeah.
than it is by some creative who just has such a pull to put their creation out there.
I think it's an interesting question, because I think you see there is a white space there, and I think for the last few years, with a lot of these direct to consumer brands who have been super successful because of these analytics and data, product has been developed, not designed. It has been developed based on data. And they've been smart in most of these companies have a very focused product mix. So again, Quiana, like, very edited.
Hmm.
Everlane, very edited, very focused. It's not like the old collections that I used to do, where you had 80 styles. It
Right.
is focused, and the supply chain is locked in, and you have every piece of that puzzle. So I think there is that white space for, dialing the needle back a little bit toward, the creative part, and product that is designed, and that there's a point of view. So I think you're going to see sort of, again, that pendulum kind of balance out a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's good. Good point. Um, so collaborations, you've done many over your career. Um, Maybe walk us through, and this is perhaps for emerging designers, perhaps for young lawyers, the process of a collaboration becoming extant, right? How does it start? Do you use a licensing agent or some brand manager? Do you cold call brands that you like? And what's the process? And I'll sort of chime in from someone who's worked on collaborations with you, as to what the legal role is in that timeline.
I mean, in terms of collaborations, they can happen in honestly any of the above ways. You can have a brand manager, you can cold call somebody. Now it can be an Instagram connection where
Right.
two brands or people behind the brands feel a synergy and a friendship. So really, I think now, in terms of sort of getting a brand acquisition, it is kind of there's many channels to get there. In terms of how you build out the brand collaboration, there's really only a few ways to do it. It's either a licensed sort of royalty model. I mean, there's a few other, or just a straight fee, or a percentage of sales, or whatever it is. Um, Brand collaborations to me are when I was doing them, are one of the most powerful ways to expand your community and expand your brand recognition, because you're really reaching, again, another pool of
Right,
consumers.
right. And you're creating a press moment, of course.
Yeah,
There's going to be this drop of, usually, if I find the most effective ones are limited. I mean,
yeah.
certainly, a lot of retailers have found that those are successful as well. Um, and so you reach out maybe through Instagram, maybe you met somebody at a store opening. Um, when do you call the lawyer? Do you work out the business terms so that the economics are fairly set, or do you reach out to us and say, "Hey, we know you've done a lot of these. What should I be proposing in terms of the economics?"
I usually would bring in a lawyer like you sooner than later, because I think I want to speak to you and understand kind of, okay, what should the deal terms kind of look like? So I can go back to the collaborator and really with an informed kind of checklist of what I should be expecting, depending on who's papering the deal.
Right.
You really want to make sure you understand what's going on. Like, I don't want to sit there and negotiate for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month and then come to you and then we have sort of backtrack and sort of look at everything.
Yeah.
I think it's a much more efficient use of time for me to call you right at the beginning, or within the first few meetings, and be like, okay, this is happening, like, I just want to let you know, and this is kind of what we're talking about. And then you'll have call outs that I won't even think about because that's what you do.
Yeah. I mean, usually, so from a business perspective, the collaboration is going to put more risk on one party than the other because one party typically will be handling the production, right? So if you do a collab with an eyewear manufacturer, with this cool Japanese company that we don't know the name of yet, they're going to be making the glasses, right? They're going to be making them whether they have their own facilities or they have relationships with factories. So therein lies their risk, because as we know, they're going to have to pay for that up front, and the product isn't going to ship. So it's about the balance of that risk. And so if that's my client, I'm cognizant of that risk, and perhaps I'm wanting some financial contribution up front so that risk is mitigated. Whether it's a royalty, whether it's a straight fee, that is really back end. That's the parties, paying each other. The main other component that is important is the messaging, is the marketing element, because really it's more stuff. It's not that this stuff necessarily must come out. It's two brands, sort of creating their own unique story in terms of getting together. And so the messaging of that and the consistency of that is very important to document and have agreement on, as well as the length of time that you can do it, particularly if, the cool Japanese eyewear manufacturer may be something that you'd be happy to have that brand alliance and affiliation for years.
Yeah.
If it's Kohl's, maybe that's something you want to be a short drop in a short time period, because seeing Peter Som's name associated with Kohl's over and over again, no disrespect to Kohl's, but it would be a down market, place for you to have your products. I'd be cognizant of wanting to limit that in time and very much restrict that and how they can use the trademark. So those all get wrapped usually into a term sheet or a letter of intent that outlines the basic terms of the deal, the most material terms. And the parties would agree to that, and often would even sign a non-binding term sheet or letter of intent, so that when they get to a long form agreement where they really are kind of paying legal fees in earnest, because it's a fully drafted agreement that has a license and has the restrictions on use and has agreements on use, they're sure that they have a deal in hand and that the economics are set, and it's very much a dirty pool to go outside the bounds of an agreed term sheet. It's not necessarily illegal, but it typically means the parties say, well, you agreed to this back at the term sheet stage, you're now changing your mind, I don't want to deal with you. And then that process of negotiating the agreement, we would work with the client, you or anyone else. But it would really be, from your perspective, is this any different than the term sheet? Because when it comes to an indemnification clause, when it comes to representations I'm making about my trademark, I trust my legal counsel to know what the right balance of risk is. If you have someone on the business side at your company, that might be a closer relationship that we have with them. But when we as a firm are dealing with true creatives who also happen to be the CEO of their companies, we're kind of taking that role of making certain business decisions because we do it so often.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really that, what's your return on investment? The marketing piece is a huge, especially for a collaboration. It's about, again, storytelling, and it's about expanding your brand reach. And I think we've always entered into collaboration strategically, and it is about that mix of, okay, the marketing, the storytelling, the sort of another piece of the puzzle of the brand, and how we can reach more people. And then there's the royalty side. I mean, I think you mentioned Kohl's. My Kohl's collaboration was a 1 month drop, and it was massively successful. And I think that was an eye opener for me in terms of understanding that, even just in terms of on the creative side, that my design aesthetic, our design can translate at all levels, and that it can resonate with consumers at that shop at different price points. But it is really about that strategic I can't talk. That strategic mix of all those things you talked about, and it has to work for all parties at the end.
Well, so at the CFDA Awards this year, Kim Kardashian received an Influencer of the Year award, and the role of the influencer, Kim in particular, but there are many with a similar amount of weight, if not as much. I mean, she definitely can move the needle for a lot of brands. What are your thoughts on the role of influencers in the fashion industry? Is it good for brands? Does it detract from brand and mixed message? And how do you think it's being used?
I think the role of influencer is, I started my brand years before influencers were, like a capital I. They were, my clients, women about town, we call them socialites if you had to. Now social media influencers have a capital I, and they have dollar signs attached to kind of what they wear and how they communicate it,
and set price points and rate schedules, candidly, and their posts are regulated to the extent they're actually paid for it. So you often see those hashtag
ad and sponsored
ad, exactly.
There's no denying that influencers can move the needle. I mean, obviously, a Kardashian or a Hadid can move the needle and increase your brand recognition like exponentially, like within a day. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I think obviously the key is to make sure that the influencers speak to your brand and your DNA and who they are. So it's not necessarily a one size fits all. You really have to focus and understand which brand ambassador or influencer really can communicate your message the best way, and that you have a synergy with, because it's really all about an authenticity. Even though it's sort of a transactional kind of situation, you do want to make sure there's an authenticity. Does this person like your brand, or is it going to feel like it just hashtag ad?
Right.
So I think, again, at the end of the day, it is how do you communicate your authentic brand message in the best way possible. And, influencers are one piece of the pie.
Okay. Well, Peter, it's been great to spend the morning with you. That's a wrap.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks for coming in. For your efforts, you'll receive a copy of The Laws of Style.
Right, hold on, what should I say? Oh, there we go. Look at that. Can we zoom in on this? No.
And listeners, you too can obtain a copy of The Laws of Style on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or my publisher, the American Bar Association's website. Just type in The Laws of Style, type in Douglas Hand, type in sartorial excellence for the professional gentleman. Any of those terms should get you there. And also feel free to follow me on Hand of the Law at Twitter and Instagram. Peter, any social media shout outs or other final words?
Follow me on Instagram. Mine's at Peter Salm. I think this is a great talk. Great way to spend a morning.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Doug.
Bye now.
You've been listening to The Laws of Style with Douglas Hand. For more information, go to our website at www.hballp.com. And you can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Hand of the Law. Thank you for tuning in, and stay stylish.